Welcome back to the DenCast, everybody. We are recording episode number 10 tonight. With us as our guest at Applebee's is St. Ignace native and longtime referee Don Gustafson. Don, thank you for coming in and joining us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure, Scott.
So you've been officiating since, I don't know, time began?
1979.
1979.
So this is my 46th year.
Do you still enjoy it as much as you did?
I do. My wife makes fun because it's my hobby. It's my avocation, and I really do enjoy it. And I'm doing probably as much or more since I'm semi-retired as far as working and stuff. That's sort of what I do as a hobby.
Well, the doing more, there's no question about that with the shortage of officials in the area. Well, actually, it's not just the area, it's everywhere. How do you guys, how many nights a week could you work if you wanted to?
Well, I think on the whole, football, if we're starting right now, it's fall sports. Football is basically limited to Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. We're doing quite a few JV football games on Thursday. We have a full slate of Fridays. We have a Saturday varsity game, and those who are interested in doing junior high, those are available on Saturdays as well. What I know happened on one Saturday game I had, and this is what is occurring in officiating, at least in our area, and I don't think it's incidental only to our area. I had a school that couldn't find officials for Friday night, so they called and they said, there's no one. Would you be available on either a Thursday or Saturday if we moved our game to that day? And I said, yeah, I'm available both of those days. Well, how about Saturday afternoon? So we're doing, and what is happening with some schools is that in order to try and find officials, everyone isn't, there aren't enough officials, I should say, to have everyone cover one single Friday night. When we get to basketball, and I know, Scott, you've been involved in basketball, there's games on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. They're not always limited to one night, but the tradition in football is to play Friday night. So every official that is breathing and is interested in doing it probably is working currently on Friday nights because somebody has a wedding, somebody has a funeral, somebody pulls a muscle, somebody can't get off work because the work schedule has changed and you need to find subs. We talk about a substitute teachers being hard to find in education. Substitute officials are very difficult to find, and of course, you're putting them right into the fire too, because obviously every coach is hoping that your officials are coming with their best game, and we try to do that each time, but sometimes you have to bring people to help fill in that may not be at that level in their officiating career to work certain varsity games.
Sure.
And but we've been very blessed with my crew, and right now we've got 6 guys that are we have 5 steadies, and then we have a 6th who's willing to fill in whenever needed, and that has worked out all with varsity experience. So that's a real plus, but not everyone has that. So I think you even see some games, I know the other end of the UP, where at times there are 4 officials covering a game. I was told in football, which we're talking about right now, I was told Traverse City schools are used to having 7 officials on a contest. Sort of, that's what they have a pretty good area to draw from.
Sure. Yep.
However, what now has happened is their assigner is not putting 7 officials on their game, even though they have right there in Traverse City, because in Elk Rapids or in Benzie Central or in Glen Lake or in Frankfort, they don't have enough to even have 5, so they're making sure that all the schools around the Traverse City area have 5 before you put any extras, even though clearly Traverse City West and Traverse City Central are, and I'm not sure this year if they're Division I or Division II, but they're large schools with a big drawing area.
So how many officials do you need to work like an 8-man game? Because up here, that's basically what football has become other than the Sioux.
Correct.
How many officials do you, I mean, what's the minimum for an 8-man game?
Well, again, your idea, we will do a junior varsity 8-man game with 4 guys. Varsity wise, with the length of the field being the same, the width is a little narrower, but with the length being the same, we still use 5 officials, because what happens in an 8-man game is once a tackle is broken, a lot of times there's not a safety, and then the play is going to gain big yards or go all the way. That's one of the reasons you see in an 8-man football higher scores, is because there's not the levels of defense that if somebody misses the tackle, now there's one person left to somehow save it from being a long gainer, even a touchdown.
Right.
So you still need the guys there to make sure that the block. So we do, and everyone's still trying to get 5, but most schools do understand if you've tried and something has happened with somebody or whatever, they'll understand if you have to go with 4 officials.
Okay.
It doesn't give you the deep official, which is an issue, because now if you throw a 30-yard pass pattern in the middle of the field, the coverage isn't there. And of course, then if there's some contact, the fans may not see why there aren't 5 officials on the field.
Oh, come on now. Fans are always very understanding about things like that.
And you know, I think schools have tried pretty good with their messages to fans at the games before the game, such as, here are your officials for tonight's game. Please, they're professionals, they work hard, please treat them with respect. I think the message is out there, and I do think that's improved. I do think, on the whole, my feeling is that people are aware of the shortage that exists in officiating. And I know that you see different people. We're lucky enough, we go to various places, and you show up and they say, oh, great, we haven't seen you yet this year. And one of the problems that's occurred with this few officials is it's very likely that you end up seeing the same teams over and over and over. And in a short season with only 9 weeks,
right,
I try and make sure when we're trying to do our schedule, I try and make sure we don't see a team more than twice out of the 9 games. I if I hit somebody at home, if I hit somebody on the road, but it's not good for us as officials, it's not good for the coaches, it's not good for the kids if there was a really close call at the end of a game, or was it a pass interference, wasn't it a pass interference type call, and then you're there again the next week, and then you're there again in 2 weeks. It's like there's just not enough time to move away. You'll see on the NFL, for example, and I know high school sports isn't the NFL, but the crews of officials they're here 1 week, they're at a different stadium the next week, they're at a different stadium the next week. That's what you want to try and do. Unfortunately, there aren't many officials in the Eastern UP area. And the last I saw, I think the average age of an official in the state was like 58 or something like that. That's not what we need for years to come, because that means half of the officials are into their 60s and 70s and maybe even their 80s.
And now we're pulling muscles trying to keep up with that play down the field.
Correct.
Like you were talking about.
We need to somehow get younger people involved in officiating. It's a good hobby. It's a good way to make a little bit of spare money. I got into it. I started working intramurals at Michigan State University when I went there, and I matter of fact, before that, I had umpired slow pitch softball in St. Ignace and Little League Baseball and done that. And one of the guys that was playing softball was a Spartan, was a student. He knew I was going to go to Michigan State, and he said, you know, you're doing men's softball here. That's harder to do than what intramurals are at Michigan State. Although I will tell you that by itself, there's a lot of stories I can go with there. But it was a great hobby. It was a way to make some money. I worked at MSU, and the experience that I got doing intramurals there just made me continue to want to do officiating, and started doing some high school stuff in the Lansing area. And then when I got a job back in St. Ignace in 1982, I started officiating in our area as well, put together a group of guys who wanted to do some refereeing, and we've had a lot of fun over the years.
That's awesome. I would like to backtrack on something you talked about a little bit earlier, talking about the Thursday and Saturday trend for football. One thing that I've noticed with some of our local teams is that we're seeing a lot more nights where JV and varsity play on the same field on the same night. Is that something that you guys like or don't like, or does that make it easier?
Well, there's two facets to that answer. The first answer is that I don't mind doing Thursday nights, but I think when they moved to like a doubleheader on Fridays, part of the rationale was that it may be more enticing to officials because of doing two games. There's going to be some more compensation for the officials to cover. Now, they're there a longer period of time.
And it's one fewer night.
Right, and it's one fewer night. The other thing, yes, because you're not gone both Thursday and Friday night from your job, from your home, whatever it might be. Yeah. The other thing that sort of ties into that is, and people get this mixed up, there's a rule in football that's different than basketball. You, I know, been very involved with basketball. In basketball, in the state of Michigan, for the schools that are having trouble with team membership, you're allowed to play 5 quarters in one day.
Correct.
That is not the same rule that's in for football. The rule in for football is you're allowed to play 5 quarters in 1 week. So not in one day. It's still limited to 4 quarters in a day. So that has changed some things about why teams are interested in playing Thursday and Friday, because if they play both games on Friday, that they're still only allowed 4 quarters.
And with the low numbers that some of our teams have, they may need that kid for a quarter to spell somebody who's tired or injured or whatever.
And what has happened, which I don't know is the best thing, but what's happened downstate is that they're playing some of the JV, and those schools that still have freshman teams are playing them on Saturday, because the coach, if you have that talented kid or whatever, you have them available on Friday night to be able to use them. If you don't end up needing to use their quarters, then you haven't had their JV and freshman games played prior to the varsity game, so they've moved the JV and freshman games till after the varsity game on the Saturday, so that they then know how many quarters a student has yet to play. But if they've played prior, that coaches lose some of their ability and flexibility on how much. It's a little bit different. In basketball, we've seen where they keep track, the JV, he played 2 quarters. They've got 3 left for the varsity game, because they're allowed to play 5 quarters in a day in basketball, but that is a different rule in football. It's 5 quarters in a week.
Okay. And the other thing that you said,
but no more than 4 in a day in football.
Right. The other thing you talked about that I'd like to circle back to for a second is, you talked about not wanting to see coaches or teams too many times in a given season. As a coach, like I look at that a little bit differently. Like I like knowing who's coming to
Right.
officiate the
Yeah.
game because like with your crew, I know there's going to be a certain level of consistency that's
Right.
there. Whereas if I see you on a Monday and I see somebody else on a Wednesday, it could be two totally different games.
Yeah.
You know, so from a coach's standpoint, I don't know that I agree with you
No.
not wanting to see.
I understand that, and I think Scott, it sounds to me like, and I appreciate it sounds like a compliment because I think you know that we try and do things sort of the same way all the time, but I do think that if you have the charge block call at the end of the game, 1-point game, it goes one way or another, it is not in the best interest of anybody for me after having made that call, and I'm going to try and make the best call I have, and I may screw it up at times, that's okay, to be there again the following night. But you don't know when that's going to happen.
Right.
You know, you have to tee some player up. You have to give them a technical because they lost their cool, slammed the ball down. The ball goes up towards the ceiling. That can't be ignored. That sometimes it's good to give myself and to give a break between that student and that official and that coach. But when you drop a schedule, you don't know ahead of time when are those games going to happen.
Right.
I mean, the game that we had, the week before last, where the score is like 50-14 and just goes along, and it was pretty clear right from the outset who was going to win and who was. Then you could come back without much of an issue.
Right.
You know, the game moves smoothly, but schedules are created for officials good year in advance, sometimes more. And so, excuse me, you don't know who's going to be the teams that, oh gosh, this is going to be a battle.
Right.
I think I'll say this, especially with, excuse me, with the Eastern UP here. I think I was talking at one time, being from St. Ignace, it came in basketball time. Our crew was not going to work the Class C district because at that time St. Ignace was in the Class C district,
Right.
Working at the school, all that. It was a conflict of interest. So I think it was like 10 to 12 years in a row, I was assigned to the same boys basketball district each year, and it happened to be where whoever was hosting between Cedarville, Detour, they weren't combined at the time.
Right.
Pickford and Redyard was sometimes in that district, sometimes they weren't. But it seemed like district final every year, it was always going to be Pickford versus Cedarville, or Cedarville versus Detour, or Pickford versus Detour, or Redyard versus Pickford. And those are great rivalries, and the gym is packed and whatever. But,
Absolutely.
But in the district championship game, one team season has just come to an end.
Right.
And you know, that's just how it works in tournaments. And we actually have some officials who are good with working the regular season and don't mind working quite a few games in the regular season, but because they work in certain areas here in the Eastern UP where they have interactions with parents from other schools, they really don't want to work tournament games because it's that thing about, I have to deal with this at the end of the year. It's one thing to work a regular season game, and there's always another regular season game.
Right.
But tournament, somebody's season is coming to an end.
Sure. And
I just go out and I say, I'll do the best I can, and the one thing I don't understand, I haven't understand this from fans, and I'm not painting all fans that way, but there are certain fans, I think, who may have the opinion that I really care who wins the game. I could give a rip when I come to Sault Ste. Marie and Sioux's playing Petoskey. I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but I really don't care if Sault Ste. Marie won the game or if Petoskey won the game. I go home after, I drive back to St. Ignace after the game, and it's over and done with. But I think sometimes there's a perception that you're going to get home cooked or whatever, the referees are there home, they're going to have home cooking for the officials.
As a coach, I'm not going to lie.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that thought.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen officials walk into the gym, and my first thought is, where's the athletic director at? Because I got to go yell at him about this,
Yeah.
And I'm sure as officials, you look at games on your schedule and go, why did Gustafson schedule that?
I know, they do.
My
partners will say that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
What on earth were you thinking there?
Yeah. So, I want you to dispel or give credence to a longtime basketball myth, or actually sports myth: the makeup call.
Yeah, I don't buy it because it goes back to the old thing where I'm trying to make the right call each time. So if I make the wrong call, I'm not going to compound, from my view. I'm not going to try and compound making another wrong call just so that now each team has that even wrong call.
So now
that isn't the way it is. But I think people automatically think it, and sometimes it just sort of happens that the tempo of the game leads that you've got somebody over the back here, and then and over on the other end, then somebody has over the back. And if you're consistent, and I said over the back, and that is an error, as we know, it's a technicality that's used. There's not a foul until it's on the back. You can actually reach over someone's back. You just can't be on their back. But that isn't something. But that you've seen certain things that all of a sudden seems like all of it goes one way. I've also seen that too, and it does seem to work sometimes that a coach gets a technical foul, and then all of a sudden it seems like the momentum switches around and goes in their direction. And I don't like when the game is devolved to the point that you have to give someone a technical foul.
Right.
But when it does, that doesn't mean I'm going to, at least for me, I'm not going to start changing the way I'm calling things to do things.
Sure.
Sports officiating is truly, though, an art. It's not as much a science. There are people who, there is a part that you need to know your rules. You definitely need to know your rules. That's the science. You need to be in the right position. That's a science. But the decision about when there's contact and what to call, when somebody hits the kicker, was it roughing the kicker? Was it running into the kicker? Was it nothing because they were blocked into the kicker? Or was the kicker faking the contact? That part, I think, comes with lots of years of experience. Is really, and I think that is what happens. And we just don't have enough young officials. I still am urging people that are thinking about it. We have LSSU right here in our backyard from where we're taping this interview. There should be students who played high school sports that are interested on the weekend to make some additional money. I understand college freshmen and college sophomores may have other plans on Friday nights as well too, and may not want to tie theirs up with officiating.
Right.
But if you're looking for a spare income, I urge people to go on the MHSAA website and try and register. And I'm now actually looking at a little bit. That's what I'd like to see for the long term. But I was at a fast food place, and I was watching how they had some older employees. And I thought, maybe we have to rethink this too, that maybe the 40 or 50-year-old who had kids that went through sports but now their kids have graduated and they're not going to watch their own children in sports, that may be a good target audience because maybe they still want to be involved in sports, but their kids have graduated. I don't blame anyone that doesn't want to officiate because they've got kids going through the system. You
Sure.
only have a certain amount of time with your kids. You'll never get that back.
Yeah.
But when they've left the system, think about what you can do, whether it be officiating. There's a lot of need in a lot of school districts for people that are willing to coach.
Sure.
If they are, especially at the lower levels, especially if they have the skills and that. So I think it's give back to high school sports. It's one of the greatest things we have going for us, and I think it really helps schools a lot. They have good sports programs.
Is it as simple as going to the MHSAA.com website and registering to be an official?
That is the part that gets you legit.
Okay.
But then what you've got to do is somehow find a person. And typically there are various people in each community. Somebody will ship them in a certain direction. I'm always willing to take a call and say, hey, touch base with this official. They're looking for officials. But you've got to find somebody, because up here it's a little different than downstate. Downstate, there are assigners for games, and they try and set up young officials with older officials on games and stuff. Up here, the officials are more independent contractors and aren't assigners.
Okay.
And so you set up a schedule with the school to do a game, and then here we bring crews a lot of times. Most of the time you're not assigned individually. Most schools say, you want to bring a crew? You got 2 other guys, or do we need to find, how's that work? And I think that really makes a difference too, because it's not nearly as much fun to go to a game by yourself, driving and then driving home, than having partners to go with and then to laugh about something that happened, or give a little razzing to somebody for something that happened during the game. Because as an official, a lot of times you call something and shortly after you called it that probably wasn't the right call.
Right.
But at that point, we're beyond it. We've got to move on. It's sort of like the quarterback who throws an interception. They can't keep dwelling on the interception, or their game's going to go down the tubes.
Right.
They've got to shake it off and look at it with a new outlook.
Okay. So again, going back to something you said earlier, how easy is it as an official to get emotionally caught up in a game? Whether it's just an intense game, or whether it's you've got this one guy that wearing just to throw a team out there, wearing a Cedarville shirt, and he's been in your ear the entire night. How hard is it to not get wrapped up in that as an official?
Some officials have a better shield, I guess would be the word, or flap to turn things off and to not let that outside influence them. I think athletes have that sometimes too, that when there's just people screaming at them, some don't let that bother them. Others, you can see them almost fold. I don't think officials are any different.
Okay.
I think it has a lot to do with one's personality as well. What I think it's important as officials, we were talking a little before the podcast started about the need, I think, to try and be pretty level throughout, not to lose one's cool, not to get too hyped up or too hyped down, not to be the peak and valley person, but the steady person. While everything else might be falling apart around you, try and keep at least somebody as the judge. It's sort of like a courtroom. You don't want to see the judge start acting like upset or emotional. you want your judges to be, and you want your arbiters to be impartial and non-emotional as they're trying to make the decisions. That's a difficult task to make when you've got coaches chewing on you. I'm going to tell you one of my funny stories, and you'll probably you'll know at least one of the people. There was one year the MHSAA tried to implement a complete seatbelt rule for the coaches. They weren't supposed to be allowed to stand in the box at all. This was way before the boxes started. This would have been probably, I'm guessing 1990s, might have been wrong. But then they sort of backed off and said a little about, but if you don't hear them, if they're just talking to the kids, it's probably okay, but try and keep them in their seat. So I'm refereeing a game up here in Sault Ste. Marie, and the boys basketball, they were playing Petoskey. And the two coaches at the time were Dennis Starkey, was the coach from Petoskey, longtime coach, real successful coach, and longtime coach here, Bill Arsenault, was the coach here.
Okay.
So just because we're not at the game, I'm going to try and paint the picture. Bill Arsenault was a short man, not very tall at all, probably 5'4", I'm guessing, not a very tall man. Dennis Starkey, on the other hand, was probably over 6 feet tall.
Sure.
Coming by and I'm doing what we're supposed to be doing from the MHSA, I'd say, Dennis, you need to sit. You're not supposed to be standing. You know the rule. You're supposed to be sitting. Okay, I know, and he wasn't really bad, but I'd say, Dennis, you need to sit. He'd say, how come you're telling me to sit and you're not telling him to sit? And he's pointing over at that time, Coach Bill Arsenault. I said, and Bill was a short man. I said, at the spur of the moment, I said, because I can't see him standing, I can see you standing. And Starkey said to me later, he said, that was the best response I've ever had from anyone. I never complained with you the rest of the time. But I didn't really have an answer other than I was trying to follow the protocols that they had at the time. But there's all sorts of funny things that happen over time, and that was one. I had one, and I won't get into too many anecdotes because that's not what this is here. But when I was umpiring at Michigan State University, I was doing an intramural softball game, and this guy is standing out of play, but getting ready to come up to bat. He has a boa constrictor around his neck. It must be his pet or whatever, but he's coming up. So now the batter in front of him gets on base, and up he walks. He's coming up to the plate with a boa constrictor around his neck. And I'm thinking to myself, and the catcher looks at me and says, hey, ump. And I'm like, I'm a young guy. I'm 20 years old or whatever at the time. He says, hey, ump, are you going to let him do that? And I looked at the guy and I said, okay. I said, you're allowed to come up to bat, but you can't bring your pet with you. And I don't know, I didn't have a rule to cite or whatever. He says, what do you mean I can't bring him? I said, you're not allowed to bring a dog up with you to bat. You're not allowed to bring a snake up with you to bat. He says, well, where am I supposed to put it? I said, I don't know. How'd you get it here? I wore it around my neck. I said, well, you're going to have to find somebody else because you didn't want to set it in the grass. So he had one roommate who he agreed would hold on to it, and he flew out, and that was the story.
I don't know. All I can tell you is that guy's not setting foot on the field just because I'm scared of that snake.
I know. I thought I'd tell you. I thought that was a good one.
Yeah, no, that's a great story.
You know?
That's a great story. So over the course of your officiating career, how many, I mean, I know that technical fouls are basketball, but
Right.
unsportsmanlike conduct, how many of those kinds of fouls do you think you've called?
Oh, I try and do a lot of preventative officiating. And, if you see a kid acting up, I think the one time we told the coach, your player's really starting to lose it out there. I think you need to take him out of the game. And the guy said, is he getting a technical foul? I said, no, but if he plays much longer, he may get one. And the coach looked back later and said, thanks. But you try and do some things. Normally you can calm a kid down and say, hey, it's there. But especially when it becomes a safety thing, if somebody goes up to shoot a layup and somebody gets undercut, that's going to be a flagrant foul. That's there. When somebody takes a basketball in a basketball game and throws it down to the floor and it goes up, and he doesn't grab it, it comes back up over his head. Doesn't just throw it hard and grab it. Comes up over your head. That's going to be an automatic.
Sure.
I hate calling the technical fouls, but I think people understand it, that are like bookkeeping errors. Those are, to me, sort of cheap, but it is what the rule says. All of a sudden, the horn sounds during the middle of the game, and number 44 is out there, but Coach Church doesn't have a 44. He has number 45 in the book because they're wearing a different number tonight than they did last week. But that's what the rule calls for, and that's what it is. If the game is called consistently, most of the time that stuff will take care of itself. Yes, a kid, especially 17-year-olds, will do something silly sometime. They'll foul out of the game, go over and kick the bench so loud that you could hear it in Marquette County instead of Chippewa County.
Right.
That's going to get you a technical foul. And if you've already had your 5 fouls, then
you're done.
It's where it is. If somebody actually swings and hits another player, that's going to be gone.
Well, that's even beyond a technical at that point.
Yes, right. They're immediately going to be gone, and they're going to be ejected for the next game.
Right.
That's just where it is. It isn't something you want to do, but at times it's one of those calls that you have to do.
Right.
And I think most coaches understand that. They may not in the moment, but the day after they'll watch the tape and say, yeah, the guy elbowed the guy in the face and they blew the whistle and called the technical and tossed him. And they didn't see it because they may have been watching the defense or something else. But then I'm not opposed to videotape. I've had a lot of coaches say, I'm going to get the videotape and I'm going to send you the clip. And I haven't gotten too many clips over time because I'm not going to say that my calls are always right. But I think when you look at it a second time with perspective, you have a chance to review and say, oh, I see what he was looking at, what he was trying to call.
Well, I can tell you as a coach, from a coach's perspective, I'm more likely to correct myself when I watch a clip than I am to send it in and say, yeah you jacked this up.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to say, okay, yeah, I see what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
So you ref football, basketball.
Well, yeah, I'm doing a lot of sports right now. I do football. I'm helping out. I'm filling in some Tuesdays in volleyball because there aren't a lot of volleyball officials in the area. I'm doing a couple cross-country meets because there aren't a lot of track and cross-country people. Some of the issues that come, and this comes with baseball and softball, which I'll do in the spring, games that start at 4 o'clock are very hard for certain individuals who have work schedules to be able to start and do games or contests that begin early in the afternoon. If you have a 9-to-5 job, that puts you out of the running. Being semi-retired, I sort of commit my own schedule. I teach a couple classes a day in St. Ignace, and I'm done by noon every day, and I'm still helping out in the business office, but that's with my own schedule.
Sure.
So I have the ability to try and get places where other people don't. In the winter, I do basketball, and that's like a lot of nights a week. And then in the spring, um, I do mostly softball, but I have done baseball, and I am registered for track, but I don't do too much of that as well. But if somebody's in a terrible pinch, I can go help out.
Okay, so if you had to give them all up but one, which one would you stay with?
I still think my favorite is football.
Okay.
I love the fall. I think the fall's the greatest season. I love football itself. I'll watch every Thursday night, Monday night, Sunday night, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoons. I love the game of football and love watching it. And the other part is with the guys, there's a crew there that it's a really good thing when you have a wonderful crew to work with, and it's fun and you look forward. It's like our game night, and we're out and having fun. I still do like basketball. Probably be my second favorite. The problem with basketball, it's a long season. There's really a major shortage of basketball officials, and all of us guys that are doing it are probably working more games than we want to. And the body at age, I'm now 63, the body starts, the knees start to feel, especially it's sort of weird how certain courts, at least for me, there are certain courts that I'll leave the game and my legs will hurt a little more than they do on other courts. And I'm guessing it has to do with what is underneath the court. Sure. And how it is. My critics would say, just walking and not running, you can't hurt your legs too bad, Gustafson, because I will say that I'm not nearly at the same level of I would never say I was ever fast, but that level of quickness has dropped some, but you guess you got to work smarter, not harder, or something.
Well, that's why we added
that.
the third official all those years ago.
That's right. And I will say that has really helped keep some officials my age or older in, because if it was still two officials and you had to cover the length of the court and the speed of the game, that's just too hard, especially if you're going as many nights a week. Now that boys and girls basketball, and I know it's been quite a few years now, but now that those are at the same time of the season, you're playing all those nights.
Yeah, and I think another thing too, like you mentioned with the number of games that you're doing a week, I think with football you have at least some sort of border between you and the fans.
Yes.
They're in basketball season, they're right on top of you. I mean, in some gyms, you could literally trip over somebody's foot sitting in the first row of the bleachers.
Sure could.
And I think that's a major factor, because I know I would never officiate basketball because I don't want to hear what Joe Schmo in the third row thinks. I don't care what he thinks, but he's going to irritate me if he's running his mouth. And for basketball, that seems like it's a constant. I mean, when I go to cover games, I catch myself thinking, holy man, just shut up for 5 minutes.
And I'm going to give kudos to the Sioux here, because we were refereeing a game in Gaylord, and the game it was going along fine from my view or whatever, but one of the fans didn't think it was going well and was a little loud, and the assistant coach actually turned around, went up into the bleachers, and self-policed and said, hey, knock it off. These are good officials. We want these officials. And they didn't have apparently the same view of our caliber of officiating as the coaches did at the time. But I think the coaches are recognizing that fans in their negativity have a chance, can turn a situation not very good. Yeah. And so I appreciate that there's some self-policing going on in that direction, because it really isn't what we want to do. In the old days, when you look back, the old officials, you get like a Jimmy Lamoureux, who's now deceased, but he was a 50-plus year official from St. Ignace. Somebody in the fan stands would say something. He'd point in the stands, say, knock it off, get out of here, and they'd begrudgingly leave. And now there's a different protocol. If we have someone we're having trouble with, we're supposed to stop the game, see the site manager, because if it became a tug of war, especially down in the Detroit and Lansing area, for the official to say, you're out of here, and then the person would say, yeah, cross their arms and say, make me, and then it became like a battle, and then you'd say to the coach, well, if they're not going to leave, you're forfeiting the game. And,
Right.
And then you're drawing lines in the sand, and that's not a positive thing.
That's a hard battle to win.
It's a hard battle to win. And but I do think schools are trying to police themselves better. I do think one of the things that happens with all these games in basketball season, I think it's problematic because it leads to smaller crowds. And in a smaller crowd, an obnoxious fan will stand out more than when you're in a packed gym. Because when you're in a packed gym, you don't necessarily hear one person, and so you don't even hear that as much in tournaments but when it's a Tuesday night and the teams are traveling from 150 miles apart, one fan can somehow, their voice can be heard more noticeably than in a packed gymnasium.
I could see that.
And so having less or fewer people at the game sometimes makes the poor sportsman like fans' voice stand out. Not the way you want it to go.
Okay. With all the officiating you've done, you've talked about some crazy circumstances that you've seen. Were there coaches that what was the craziest incident you had that involved a coach?
Wow. Let me think out loud here. I don't remember anything that jumps out terribly. I'm one of those guys that I really do this. When the game's over, it's over. So if somebody was really angry, I got one. I am, and again, we're in the Eastern UP, so I'll even mention a name. So I was refereeing a game, early years of officiating. So it was either 1983 or 1984. And it was a game for the Conference Boys Basketball Championship in Rudyard. And at the time, Rudyard was playing Sheboygan Catholic, who was in the Eastern Upper Peninsula Conference at the time. And it was a battle all the way, close game, back and forth, back and forth. Final plays of the game, Sheboygan Catholic is down a point to Rudyard, and the guard there's two defenders from Rudyard, he tries to cut through the two defenders to head to the basket. There wasn't room, in my opinion, for him to cut through the guy, but he tried anyhow and loses the ball and ends up on the floor, right? And of course, if you're in the Sheboygan Catholic crowd, you think that it's a foul, that there should have been a blocking foul. If you're in Rudyard's crowd, you think it's a good no call, right? The game ends. Rudyard ended up winning by, I think it was 1 point, but they may have added a couple free throws at the end. The game ends. We're heading to the locker room, and at that time it was two-person officiating. So the two guys, myself and my partner at the time was Dan Davis, who lives in Arizona now, but we head to the locker room. The Sheboygan Catholic coach decided apparently that he was not happy with this end no call and apparently wanted to express his dissatisfaction to us. Well, we're heading out because you just get out of when you have a call, you get out because nothing good happens at the end. And the coach is coming after us, and the sheriff at the time of Chippewa County was at the game. It was a large, well-attended game. I think his name was Case at the time, Sheriff Case. And all of a sudden I heard the sheriff say, "That's as far as you're going, son," he said to the Sheboygan Catholic coach. So we got into the Lyre, we got out of there. I hear shortly after from the Redyard people the following Monday that apparently the coach had then gone into the locker room, and he had, maybe the bolts weren't secured very well on the chalkboard that was at the time in the locker room, but they weren't, they were no longer secured after the,
oh my goodness.
So Rudyard had to call Sheboygan Catholic because the chalkboard that was on the wall was no longer on the wall, whether it wasn't fastened well or whether it had been helped off. But you know, that was a time where there was not a situation where you could diffuse anything. It's a last second decision, and the game, you know, and people say, does the game hinge on a call? And, you know, how about the free throw that was missed 5 seconds prior? Or how about, you know, whatever? It isn't just that one call in a 32-minute game.
Sure.
But it happens to be with 1 second left or whatever, and it's the last thing people remember.
And so it sure looks like that was the game.
I would throw that as one that I remember that the sheriff said, "That's as far as you're going, son."
That's a pretty good one. I can't think of one that I have that tops that.
I will say on the other end, another person from our area was Clint Spring, was a longtime Redyard baseball coach, and I umpired quite a bit of baseball back in the 1980s. And I said to him, "Clint, you know, these other umpires say how rough you are on them and stuff, and you're normally really good with me." And he said, very matter of fact, he said, "I learned in about the first or second game that you umpired that the nicer I was to you, the better the strike zone was." So I learned not to say anything. And I said, well, I guess that's a good thing, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, coaches will adapt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey, we would like to thank everybody for listening to this episode of our podcast. As always, please like, please share, give us some feedback on what you think of the podcast. We're always looking for stuff like that. And again, we are looking for sponsorship for the podcast. So if anybody out there likes what they hear and wants to be involved, please get a hold of us. We will include a link on our website to help anybody who's looking to become an official get registered and to get involved with that as well. We'd like to thank Don Gustafson for being here with us again tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Applebee's for hosting us once again, and have a good night and tune in again. Thank you.
Thank you.